So I think what I'll do is launch us in to this session. Hopefully everybody's a little bit refreshed anyway from the break that we just had, and feeling familiar and maybe even jazzed about those main findings across the Mental Health Promotion Innovation Fund projects from their first 2 years, both those pandemic years. So our panel discussion, our panel is up next, about 60 minutes. I mean, the full session, 75 luxurious minutes, goes by in a heartbeat, it seems. But the panel discussion will have about 60 minutes total, similar to yesterday's panel. There's some structure to the bookends, but then a free-for-all in between. And the free-for-all, really, that is your questions and those rated most highly by others that you have submitted. So you can continue to submit those if you wish, and that can be done through, I think there may be a link in chat. So a few remarks. Why this panel? As much effort and energy and ethical practice and robust protocols it takes to produce findings, they don't make a difference on their own, as we all know. Knowledge mobilization started at the outset with the within the MHPIF. What questions do we ask in the first place? Why? For whom? To what end? It continues now by discerning under constantly evolving conditions how to put these findings to best use. Now, 6 months from now, a year from now, how will they use the findings? What format will be most helpful? The purpose of this panel is to extend the knowledge mobilization story now that we have this first summary of findings from the MHPIF phase 1. Part of that story is more nuanced analysis. I appreciated one of the questions that came in through Thought Exchange, which was about the analysis by different subgroups. And yes, that absolutely is part of a next step in the analysis. It'll be informed by the discussion here, by the kinds of questions that have been posed. Another part of the knowledge mobilization story is asking some of the most important questions for a next phase as well. So we're constantly weaving together the knowledge development, the knowledge exchange, and knowledge use. Some of the important questions to ask over the next phase for the MHPIF itself, that's over the next 4 years, and also beyond, lots of other relevant initiatives and projects. So we've got another terrific panel today, and I would just describe them as just truly a panel of KM, knowledge mobilization champions. Links to their full bios are in the session description and under the speaker tab. Similar to yesterday, I'm not going to go into the details of those bios. I do invite you, though, to read them. What we're going to do for the opening round, each panelist has 5 minutes to share their perspective. I thought it was better in their words, their perspective on knowledge mobilization and what themes, this is the linking between 3A, B, and C. What themes from the findings from phase 1 really stood out to them, and why? We will do this alphabetical by last name for the first round. What I'll do is just introduce each speaker briefly as we transition between them. They'll each be in the spotlight for their first 5 minutes, and then we will all together be in the spotlight for the rest of the discussion. So Christine, your last name starts with a C. What can I say? So Christine Chambers, professor at Dalhousie University, scientific director for the Institute of Human Development, Child and Youth Health at the Canadian Institutes of Health Research, truly a KM champion in her own program of research and shaping the research funding programs at CIHR. I also think Christine is a champion in positivity, and I think you'll hear that from her. So Christine, thank you for being here. Thankfully, your power is back on at your house, and we look forward to your comments.
Wonderful. Thank you, Barb, and thank you to everyone. This has just been such a shot of positive energy and creativity. So I really congratulate everyone on the outstanding work that's being done and on the excellent convening that's happening in this meeting. As Barb mentioned, I'm really here today wearing two hats. One as a researcher who has sort of had her own journey in knowledge mobilization, and then now as someone sitting on the other side as a health research funder and thinking about sort of what are the opportunities for reshaping the way we think about knowledge mobilization from the health research funding perspective. So I was asked to reflect a little bit on how I would describe my perspective on knowledge mobilization. And I think the prompt was in a word or a phrase. And so actually the word is easy for me. The word is relationships. Like so many things in life, it's really about the people, the connections between the people, and the relationships that form. And I'll share a little bit about my experiences as a researcher. I've been studying, I'm a psychologist, but I study children's pain management. And for many years, I thought I was doing the right thing to make a difference for kids and families. I was doing research, publishing it in journals, presenting at conferences. But then I had my own children and I was taking them in for healthcare. And I realized that all of this great science that I had devoted my whole career to contributing to wasn't actually being used to the benefit of my own children. And there were times where I had to advocate very strongly for my children to receive what I knew to be evidence-based pain management. And my husband's an anesthesiologist. So between us, like we're a pain management expert team. And it worried me, why? Why have I been doing all of this as a scientist and it's not making a difference? So after my last maternity leave, I had the benefit of taking part in a fellowship focused on media and advocacy and policy. And I started to apply for funding and create projects that were really focused on knowledge mobilization. One of my first projects was a YouTube video that I created for parents about simple strategies they could use to better manage their children's pain. And although the video gained a lot of attention, it was really hard for me to get it in front of all of the people who I knew would benefit. And so I really came to appreciate the whole, if you build it, they will not necessarily come. And so in my subsequent work, I started to engage with media partners. So we actually partnered with Erica M's YummyMummyClub.ca, which is an online forum for Canadian mothers. And through her sort of reach and expertise in engaging parents, we ended up reaching millions of Canadian parents about children's pain management and created an online conversation with the hashtag It Doesn't Have to Hurt. From that work where we targeted parents, we were able to scale up and create a national knowledge mobilization network called Solutions for Kids in Pain, or SKIP. And at SKIP, we have over 100 different partners who work with us on different aspects of the knowledge mobilization process. So that's a little bit about my journey and how we sort of now have this whole separate stream of knowledge mobilization. As a health research funding agency at CIHR, I've been really trying to challenge us to think more about what we can do. What is CIHR uniquely positioned to do to support researchers and knowledge mobilization? Usually it's downloaded to the individual researcher, but relationships take time. Are there connections, opportunities, doors that we can open for people that will really maximize the impact of our investment in health research? In terms of the knowledge mobilization experiences that I've had that I think are most pertinent to this session and some of the conversations, it's really around creating connections and thinking outside of the box when it comes to partnerships. I think we're really good at thinking about the partners that are closely aligned with our work, but what about the partners that are really outside the box who could bring huge value add? The parenting media expert I worked with, we even had Twitter Canada join with us on a partnership at one point. These are not partnerships that I ever would have thought were possible or relevant. And then I'll end just commenting on some of the themes and the findings that really stood out for me. And I think there was a whole cluster of them around evaluation and innovation, the shifts in the research and evaluation landscape, and also the sort of silver linings and what we've all been through the last couple of years, how we've all had to innovate our work. It's amazing how before the pandemic, I had to sign hard copies of receipts and it would take months for them to get processed. But now it can take a day. So there are some real opportunities in the environment that we've been living in, and this time of disruption where you've all had to create, you've all had to innovate. It's been happening so quickly that we haven't really been able to process that. And so I think there will be a lot moving forward that we'll be able to learn from each other and really capitalize on heading into the future. So I think I've hit my 5 minutes. I'll stop there, but I'll look forward to continuing the conversation.
Brilliant, Christine. Thank you so much. So much richness already. So we'll move right through, keep going through the panelists to get these opening teasers, remarks from them. We move next to Stephanie Priest, Executive Director, Mental Health and Wellbeing Division. I can't help but smile when I see Stephanie. Centre for Health Promotion, Public Health Agency of Canada, another KM champion for both mental health promotion and policy. And we're super lucky that she is so well positioned within the federal government to play to both of those strengths. And I know there are many more. Stephanie, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you, Barb, for such a great introduction and for giving us such an energy, a positive energy for a Friday afternoon. I really appreciate it. I'd like to start by acknowledging that I live and work on the unceded territory of the Algonquin Anishinaabe. It's a beautiful sunny day here along the Rideau River. That also helps with my energy. So a little bit about my context. Mon point de vue sur la mobilisation des connaissances est de niveau national au Centre de la promotion de la santé au sein de l'Agence de la santé publique du Canada. Our perspective and my perspective is as a funder of knowledge, a user of knowledge, and a mobilizer of knowledge. So if I go to a word or two, and I can never get to one word, as you know, Barb, but I see knowledge mobilization really meaning taking local learnings and turn them into action. And for me, that means within my division, but also beyond. It's really the action words that I'm looking for in knowledge mobilization. And it's about understanding knowledge more broadly and how we share it. So understanding the why, how we share the context, how we share the how we do our work and what we're learning from the programs. Mes réflexions commencent avec les expériences du Fonds d'innovation pour la promotion de la santé mentale. C'est sûrement un travail ardu, en particulier dans le contexte d'une pandémie mondiale. Bien que personne ne débatte des défis posés par la pandémie, il est encourageant d'entendre les aspects novateurs partagés par de nombreux projets dans les séances d'aujourd'hui et d'hier. We often talk about the impact of the pandemic on healthcare workers, and of course that has been significant to say the least. But we also know that that the pandemic has had an impact on community program staff as well. And I'd just like to take a moment to thank all of the teams for their delivery and adaptation of the mental health promotion innovation projects throughout the pandemic. It's hard work and it requires dedication. And in fact, you're really generating the new knowledge while serving the needs of communities. And that's one of the themes for me that are coming out throughout the symposium. And the stories about how, as Barb was saying, you move from surviving into thriving, for me, have been really profound. For me as a funder in our organization, we're seeing that the hybrid delivery model, combining both in-person and online delivery, offers opportunity to expand reach. And these are areas for further knowledge mobilization and sharing that will also influence other programs within my division, not solely the Innovation Fund. And another theme for me around knowledge mobilization is how we scale, how we adapt our programs. So the implementation science is part of that knowledge mobilization. And within my division, we have been very fortunate to deliver several programs that are adaptable and have been able to take proven principles to ensure that our funding programs are trauma-informed and support cultural safety. I'd say one challenge in doing this work is really about how we do it and who we partner with, sort of coming to some of the things that Christine mentioned in her remarks. We need to have partners and we need receptive audiences. So for example, how can we connect grassroots programs and communities to knowledge and evidence in a way that they can use the information? Each audience really requires tailored information that is specifically made for them so that the knowledge can be mobilized. And we want to seize this momentum for upstream mental health promotion in the design of our programs and our new programs. So how do we do this? Nous avons l'occasion de prendre ces idées qui ont été rassemblées par le Carrefour DEC à partir de vos projets et de les appliquer à d'autres programmes de financement de l'ASPC et aussi de là de nos frontières, de mobiliser les connaissances au niveau mondial. L'équipe et moi pouvons partager les résultats du modèle de financement du Fonds d'innovation PSM et les innovations des projets pour la possibilité d'influencer un changement de système plus vaste. Pour moi, c'est le but ultime de la mobilisation des connaissances. Mobilizing knowledge for me is about being able to implement and influence systems change. And that is definitely of a global interest right now, looking at upstream actions. And more organizations, partners, governments are starting to realize that just putting out the fires in the short term is not enough. We must have balanced community and system level change that creates lasting solutions. So I'll leave it with that as some of the themes that I've heard. I see Barb has come on to let me know before the Academy Award music comes on and shoos me off the stage. But I'm really looking forward to hearing all of the different views from the panel, but also from all of the participants. Thank you. Merci.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Stephanie. Oh, there's just so much to dig into already. So let's keep going through our opening round. I'm really pleased to introduce next Valerie Salt, Senior Research and Policy Associate with PolicyWise for Children and Families. This panel is actually the first connection between Valerie and myself, and I'm really grateful for it. Look forward to learning more about your work, Valerie. She's clearly a KM champion. And I know some of what she will share. I had that little sneak preview, but it's hers to share. So I'm not going to steal any of that thunder, Valerie. And I know you'll also be picking up on some of the big needs and ideas that were discussed yesterday. So welcome, and we look forward to your remarks.
Thank you, Barb, and thanks again for inviting me. And it's lovely to meet the rest of the panelists today. And it was a privilege to join in yesterday and observe and listen, and just so much richness in the discussion. Looking forward to be able to continue that conversation today. First, I'd like to acknowledge that I'm joining from Mohkinstsis, otherwise known as Calgary, within Treaty 7 territory, the traditional and ancestral territory of the Blackfoot Confederacy, also home to the Métis Nation of Alberta, Region 3, within the historical Northwest Métis homeland. So unlike others, it is cold and snowy today in Calgary, so enjoying being nice, cozy indoors with everyone. My perspective of knowledge mobilization, what came to me is really evolving. Coming from a research and evaluation background, specifically in sociology, I came from the misconception that KM was about making like the infographic from a report, and through experience and specifically working with PolicyWise over these last 5 years, really recognizing that it's a process and it's a comprehensive approach, and it's not an end product by any means. It's a continued conversation, something that needs to be woven into all aspects of the work, from conception to kind of the finished aspect of something. So that's the perspective I'm bringing predominantly in my work, and in working most closely with youth mental health hubs in Alberta. Straight from that development, our work at PolicyWise began in this field through a contract through Alberta Health to develop and really explore what could youth mental health hubs in an integrated environment look like in Alberta. And in learning from the work of others, we had the opportunity to work alongside communities through the development, implementation, and ongoing evaluation. And 4 years ago, it started as 2 communities, has blossomed into 11 communities running this in small to medium population centers in Alberta, particularly those that are outside of urban settings. So really looking at extremely diverse contexts, recognizing that there are resource disparities between some communities, particularly when we are working with 3 Indigenous nations across the province who are implementing these services, and looking at those lessons learned from a on-the-ground approach, and recognizing how do we translate those findings to those decision makers. Communities can only do so much at their level. There are these bigger issues that require that systems change, as others have spoke about. And in translating that knowledge to what's happening on the ground that isn't always clean and fits nice little data categories, especially when there can be very output driven knowledge is the emphasis, shifting that needle to really carry that narrative and the stories and the experience of those on the ground. And I really appreciated reviewing the findings from this initiative and the different programs in recognizing the similarities and that we can be in totally different geographic locations and yet still going through so many similar aspects. Quite a lot really resonated. I'm in the throes of evaluation right now for those 11 sites in the provincial initiative and being like, yep, this resonates this. And how do we collectively work together, recognizing that so much is being done in similar areas, bringing that knowledge together and championing change at that larger systems level. So I think the core theme that really stood out to me is that evolving process of adaptation. And going through this kind of work is not linear, and the knowledge shared at one point in time, give it a couple months, it might shift. And it's not necessarily saying that that is invalid or that that is something that you're jumping the gun, recognizing that is a point in time reflection, and that is the experience of that program, the community, the people using the services, and what led to the changes, and understanding that and sharing that you need to be ready to shift gears. And as the communities have pivoted frequently throughout COVID, I think it just highlighted that need to be adaptable and really looking at the changing nation relationship of those partnerships, that there's been so many changes that have impacted people, who's being involved. And I think it's highlighted more so than ever the importance of protecting practices that are maybe happening on the ground in policy with keeping it relationship based. There are risks in that somebody is wonderful, they're doing a great job, that person leaves, and if it's not protected in policy in some way, you lose that work that's been happening and you're going back when it doesn't necessarily need to be that way. So I think taking all this information together, there's so much that I'm excited to talk and hear from other panelists and continue this conversation. So thank you, Barbara.
I know, unmute. Thank you so much. All right, we have our fourth panelist coming up. This is Louis Soren, and recently retired as CEO and president from End Homelessness Winnipeg. And again, similar to Valerie, this panel is my first direct connection with Louis, and what a gift already. We had a phone call the other day, and I could just feel his wisdom, his sacred knowledge. I know you will too. Louis, welcome, and looking forward to your remarks.
Good afternoon, and thank you for the invitation. I also want to greet my colleagues on this panel. I am moved and impressed by the knowledge you hold and that you treasure, and the knowledge that you share with others. It's important for me to situate myself. I sit in Winnipeg, which is the heart of Turtle Island, at the crossroads of the Red River and the Assiniboine River, a meeting place for thousands of years for Indigenous peoples and non-Indigenous peoples to develop relationships, to exchange knowledge. I am honored to represent the peoples of this territory, Treaty 1. My spirit name is Red Buffalo Man, and I belong to the Wolf Clan. So I share that with you so that you know who I am before you know what I know. We're in a very, very important time as a society, as communities, as leaders, as participants in a story that we're trying to tell together. And it is the story of change. I've been watching and reflecting and participating in some difficult moments that we've had in the last few years because of the pandemic. My career ended. The last chapter was that of CEO of End Homelessness Winnipeg. And in Winnipeg, we developed a 10-year plan collectively with the community as a community. And I was invited to lead the establishment of that organization. And so the organization is in year 5, and I retired from the role about 2.5 years ago. The questions that we were placed for us with what would be one perspective in a word or phrase about what is knowledge mobilization. And I believe that knowledge is nothing if it's not treasured and kept sacred in the minds, hearts, and actions of individuals. So knowledge mobilization, in my thinking and in my experience and in my teachings, is the establishment of relationships, like we said earlier, that are sacred because the knowledge lives in those people who are living the experiences. We believe in Indigenous perspectives that knowledge and truth are not a pearl the way they are in Eurocentric thought. You often hear the saying that within everything there's a pearl of truth, a pearl of wisdom. We don't believe that. We actually believe that knowledge and truth is more like a crystal, where there are different faces that are interconnected. And our responsibility, and it's especially true through the pandemic, is not to say that we know, but our responsibility is to move around that circle, move around so we can see the different perspectives and gather the different knowledges, which are equal. There's no hierarchy in knowledge if it's based in truth and in the teachings. So one of my commitments, life commitments around knowledge mobilization is to invest and dedicate myself to learning and to teaching in many ways in my actions, decisions, values, and emotions or feelings, to dedicate myself to the expansion of the continuum of knowledge to include with equal weight and sacredness the knowledge of those who've been marginalized for many, many centuries now, Indigenous peoples. And so that's my perspective on knowledge mobilization. It's a tricky question, but it is one that reveals itself through the relationships that we are committed to. So thank you.
What a great opening to really launch us into I think what I'm anticipating a very rich conversation. I want to pick up first on, and I'm trying to knit some things together from all four speakers actually, and it's this notion of different knowledges. Picking up on the concept yesterday about quality evidence. What does that mean? We all bring different mental models to that idea of quality evidence, the different knowledges. And Valerie, I recall in some of your notes, different knowledges of lived experience, contextual knowledge, practice-based knowledge. What do all these things mean? I would invite the panelists to step in and actually, get them spotlit right on the screen, and to invite comments about this notion of different knowledges and why these different knowledges may be important for what we heard quite a bit about: community, system change. It's about knowledge for action.
I can begin. I think we've known as Indigenous peoples, we've known, despite the marginalization and attempts that have been taken to exterminate us, we've known things. We've had different knowledges that have kept us alive, that has helped us survive, and in fact thrive. And we're at a point where those knowledges, they're not less than, because they're scientific, because they're well established through time as worthy and as meaningful, and that they are a gift that is available to non-Indigenous Eurocentric thought design, co-construct new solutions that before were limited by the Eurocentric paradigm of epistemology and the paradigm of knowledge making, which was hierarchical, which was reductionist, which was elitist, which was based on difference rather than what unites us, which was knowledges that were meant to protect privilege, knowledges that were meant to dismiss and deconstruct any form of resistance, and knowledges that were used to inform policies that would protect social position and maintain a social contract that was not actually co-constructed, that was meant about devaluing and expecting in a colonial way performance from the marginalized groups, the broken people, or those that we were afraid of. It was all based on compliance, knowledge of compliance. And so this is a new kind of evidence for us, because it's about reclamation of that knowledge, but also reflection on most of the work as far as the new knowledge involves a reflection and a looking within in academia, in policy setting, in systems, to see how the toxic threads of marginalization and colonization have impacted our processes and have led to status quo rather than transformative change. And it's not the Indigenous people that need transformative change, it's society. If we look at what the pandemic has taught us, is that we are poised for, if we have the courage to engage in transformative relationships and structures that could create a new treaty that would define us in the world.
And Louis, this is building so richly on the discussion yesterday about the transformative change required that is mental health promotion, that inequity is illegal. So you're speaking directly to
Yes.
that. And what is the role of these different knowledges that are going to contribute to that? I saw so many nods from other panel members. I'd like to invite others to comment on this as well.
Louis, what you
Valerie.
just shared really resonated. And I think from my perspective, and that when I think of contextualizing knowledge, and really from the get-go is taking that humble, open approach and recognizing that you're trying to share in ethical ways what really was never yours to begin with. As a researcher, I get the privilege of working with individuals on the ground, with the service providers, often with youth directly, and really being open about the depth of knowledge in communities, in structures, in culture, and looking to bring it together, and then also looking to deconstruct those structures, because those are equally as problematic. Sometimes you're trying to fit a square peg in a round hole, and recognizing, why are we doing this? How can we step back and challenge maybe assumptions on what it means to do evaluation, what it means to share information, and really do it in service of those on the ground who hold the knowledge, who are we're being privy to share it, and really doing them justice to maybe open up perspectives to what others are doing, bringing some additional knowledge into community so that they can learn from others, and creating that almost like that community of practice. So really being sensitive to the context, being deeply engaged with community, and understanding what are their values, what does it mean to them to be doing the work, and what are the practicalities of doing the work, and really finding out to be open to understand better and what is meaningful to that community, and bringing them the knowledge, and also uplifting the knowledge to the right audiences as well that they hold.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Valerie.
I
Stephanie.
can maybe go next. So as you were talking, Louis, it made me think as well, some of the things as far as the past existing very colonial structures of the way in which we develop knowledge and share it. I just want to say those structures still exist, and that the fact that we are trying to be more adaptive and flexible is good, but you're really shining a light on the importance of addressing structural structural and inherent racism within our policies and our processes. And I will say, from a privileged position of where I sit and where I come from and who I am, that can be really uncomfortable. And I think when I'm thinking about what you're saying and reflecting on it, I'm thinking it's not wrong to be uncomfortable. Like, maybe that's the right place, one of the places that we need to start, and not be afraid of being uncomfortable with change. And it doesn't mean that we don't do it, but we have to recognize that it's uncomfortable, and we have to then bring in others into our tables for co-development or sharing our power, if you will, or giving. And that's hard. It's easier maybe as an individual, depending on where you sit. It's harder for a whole organization to do, but it doesn't mean that it shouldn't be done. And that's the uncomfortable part of change that we can't be afraid of.
Thank you, Stephanie.
I'll jump in here. Yes, Stephanie, it's interesting you speaking to some of these structural issues. As Louis was talking, I wrote down the word silo, because I think, that has been one of the biggest challenges that I've seen, is just the different siloing of expertise and experience. And you're right, it is uncomfortable when you bring people together from different perspectives. And, this whole issue of what is quality evidence to a scientist who wants to publish in a journal, what's quality evidence to a child and parent who needs services, what's quality evidence for people who are engaged in service delivery, what's quality evidence for a policymaker. I mean, those are hard to operationalize. And then, getting into the intersectionality of some of those complex pieces. So I think, just what Louis, what you shared is just so powerful. It's just a completely disruptive, that word I used before, like, we are uncomfortable. This is a disruptive time. And, what are we learning from each other that will help to make us less siloed and better able to connect in a way that will really support health promotion, mental health promotion, and knowledge mobilization.
Fantastic. Now, we have so little time on this. However, what I want to do is knit a couple of things together. We heard at the outset how comprehensive knowledge mobilization really is. We've started kind of into this about what is the evidence in the first place, right? And yet, for the sort of comprehensiveness to be knitting knitting these different elements together, there's what is the evidence in the first place, how, or what is valued, what is considered quality. How do we then generate these different types of different knowledges and its use and influence? I'm simplifying, but I think that's important because this is a system of influence. And it has implications for funders. It has what you were describing, Christine and Stephanie. It has implications for project teams that are funded to do their local work and have evaluation requirements to meet. It is relevant to those of us, Valerie, yourself, and myself, and our roles in supporting evaluation and research within projects. So I'm wondering if we might now turn to some comments about, are there some promising or not trends with, approaches, let's just call it evaluation approaches, that we perhaps need to be supporting within communities? Is there anyone who would like to start?
I can jump in and kick things off there. I mean, there's a lot there, Barb. One of the things I've reflected on is how little we know about how to study that sort of implementation and all the things, as I'm reading through the themes, everything that everyone's been struggling with around scaling and pivoting and, penetrating, how little we actually know about all these critical issues that we struggle with. We know what works and what doesn't work. When it comes to certain mental health interventions, but it's more that putting it into practice piece. And this is why within our institute and with partners at CIHR, we've just launched a pre-announcement for a funding initiative called Mighty, Mental Health in the Early Years. And these are team grants and their implementation science team grants, because we're trying to address that gap in knowledge, which is, how do we study and share the knowledge about how to share how to mobilize the knowledge. So that's just one perspective on, how we can learn and grow around the process side, which I think is what, anyone involved in delivering programs and services. I mean, that is so much of what we wrestle with and so much of what has had to change during the pandemic.
Stephanie.
I think from our perspective in funding the Mental Health Promotion Innovation Fund, one of the things that we try to do with the program design is create the space and the time with our funding, and so that we have longer term opportunities for longer term funding throughout the project cycles through the different phases. And I think that is something that can be positive in the way in which it allows the time for the projects to be able to explore and expand and adapt and learn from each other without coming to a decision, if you will, on a yay or nay. It's kind of a binary decision very quickly, which traditionally in some of our funding programs of the past, that's what happens. So I think we try and provide time for the building of partnership, for the building of knowledge throughout the process through funding. But I'm just coming back to something that Louis said in his opening remarks too, that I'm just thinking about. I think we tend to try and solve all these problems still, or at least I do, and it's perhaps from my own training, in a very linear way. And so it's a paradigm shift for me to get out of my linear thinking and bringing in the different perspectives from the traditional knowledge holders, whether they be in our Indigenous or First Nations, Inuit or Métis communities, or in new communities and new knowledge that might be coming in from some of our newcomers to Canada. Like, there's a richness there of connecting that. And not being and sitting in the complexity a little bit more. And as I said, I think our programming, what we try to do is allow some time for us to do that with the funding and for the projects to do that.
Thank you, Stephanie.
That's so powerful what you're saying. And it's interesting when I witness and participate in these projects and the review of projects and the proposal writing process. It's interesting because it often starts with someone thinking that they know the solution. And then they build a pathway towards adaptation, design, implementation, evaluation. And that's a comfortable pathway for academia, for systems, for groups who want funding. You come to a solution and then you work your way back to, and it's a bit risky as well, and it's limited in its benefits, rather than coming with a stance of not knowing, and curiosity and courage and humility, and then building. There are 4 things in my mind that you need to do if you're going to develop programming, new approaches. If you're going to make change the core outcome rather than data, and repeat status quo. And the 4 elements to the process of mobilization start with belonging. Do not generate a solution, an idea, a research, a proposal if you don't belong. So please show me the investments you've made in belonging with that community, with those individuals that you care about enough to participate with. Show me that you are part of that circle rather than leading the circle, that you are one voice and that you carry gifts, but everyone does in the circle. The next is mastery, meaning not that you are the expert, but that you have mastered the process of learning. Not that you know the answer and that you're trying to bend to your will or to your perspectives, the implementation or the idea or the technique or the program, because you want to scale it up, which that's your interest. And so you will only, and I have witnessed it, whereby very well-meaning individuals are interested in spreading the news about what they feel works. And trust me, it feels colonial to those in the margins, because those who are most marginalized currently will have to wait in the scale up process till till it's offered to others, because they're seen as too complicated, too resistant, too weak, to not having capacity. A whole bunch of excuses are given why they shouldn't go first. And their perspectives are always going to be devalued. The third one is humility in leadership. So if you're going to do knowledge mobilization, if you're going to participate, you have to be humble in your leadership. And the best form of leadership that you can offer is allyship, whereby you are walking with people, you are not leading the parade. Because I remember taking a master's in health systems leadership at Royal Roads. And I made the analogy as part of my thesis, that a lot of leadership is the work of peacocks, whereby they find a parade and they have to get in front of it. But let's be real, a peacock doesn't look so good from the back. It's quite exposed. It only looks good from up front. And a lot of this work that we're doing in mental health, along with other things. I went to Ottawa to develop the Brighter Futures Initiative 40 years ago in response to the suicide epidemic in Canada. And the issues are still here, despite $500 million offered over 10 years at that time. So what are we doing? What needs to be done different? So we have to be humble in our leadership and in our allyship, and we have to be generous. I've always asked universities who are prepared to do this work, could you do it, or would you do it if there were no dollars attached? That would be generosity. Would you do this work? Would you share your skills, your time, your privilege, your resources, your leadership, your knowledge for free, where it wouldn't benefit you at all? So no funding would be required. This is a commitment that you're making to that community, to capitalize, to focus, to organize in a generous way, to give the best of yourself as an organization or an institution. Would you do it? And I'm troubled when the benefactors of funding are often not the constituent, that the most of the privilege is kept to uphold, to preserve, to create more elitism in publishing. And so all the four elements that I've mentioned to you require time. It's time and listening that will help you navigate this knowledge mobilization, production, and generosity. So be prepared to take time. But the pandemic has also told me, and I've witnessed it, is that for the first time in a long time, for mainstream society, we know what it's like to live in the margin. We've got a glimpse because the inequities are close to home. We've experienced things that have been long-standing for many people. Now we get a glimpse of what it's like. And it will take courage to become comfortable, to to grow the relationships, that we can be comfortable in the ambivalence, comfortable with the marginalization. Because let's face it, we're all working in the system right now, all of us. And the system will marginalize us if we have the courage to go in this direction of doing equity work and speaking to the truth and to power. So those are my thoughts in the sense of moving forward in that regard.
Thank you, Louis. Now, if anyone would like to respond directly to Louis' comments, please feel free. It's so difficult to, we can't disentangle what is the view of quality evidence with how it then is generated and honored. And ultimately, a question that came up yesterday, and Stephanie, I think in your remarks today, it's about responsiveness, receptor sort of capacity, the actual use, absorption, to influence, to make change.
I can react to Louis. Oh, sorry, Stephanie. I'll
No, you
just
go
say
ahead.
that I just wrote down the stance of not knowing. That really was powerful to me. And I think about some of the most effective knowledge mobilization, or all of the most, effective knowledge mobilization is where people have, partnered from a stance of not knowing with those who are impacted, right? That co-creation of programs with youth, that working together hand in hand with parents to really understand their needs. And you're so right, Louis, like when I reflect on, the systems that are constructed, what you need to do to get your grant, it does reinforce that the solution, that all of the uncertainties are worked out, that you have identified all the risks and have mitigation strategies, and as opposed to really taking that stance of not knowing, seeing who you can invite or who will invite you to be able to learn together and explore how to really make an impact. So I just wanted to share that stance of not knowing. How do we create conditions that support that instead of reinforcing the concept that we have to know the solution from the beginning. So thank you for that.
I can maybe speak to some of the things I was thinking about on that too. We can bring, within our funding programs, the way in which we can evolve, and we have evolved, some of the ways in which we ask for different types of information, and we could do even better on that. I'm not saying that we're fully there yet. We can bring, different voices to the tables. I'll just say, but hearing them, there's listening that we've talked about, but truly hearing and what we do with that is another part of the picture. And so, I've heard from the panelists about being open. We've talked about that through the symposium. These are all fundamentally important, absolutely. But I'm just struck in listening to you, Louis, about and then what? And so what do we do with the knowledge that we are gathering, that we are learning about, our curiosity, our humility? But I do think that depending on where we sit, we all have a role to play in doing something with that information, and being able to not take it and make it our own and bring it up, but how do we support those that haven't had a voice around these tables of really moving that information into action?
Mm-hmm.
And that's more than just that's really active listening and then taking that action with it. And it can be opening up tables that haven't been diverse. It can look a number of different ways. It can be specific in our programming, and how that evolves. It is not we're an innovation fund by our name. I think that means that innovation means that we have to keep evolving and be open to that, and show that kind of progress.
So Stephanie, you've given some examples of what does that look like. I wonder, Valerie, in your own work about engaging with hubs, I wonder if you might have some comments to provide here.
Sure. And all of this has really stuck with me. And through this conversation, being aware of the responsibility you have as being a partner in the work. I think sometimes people are looked at as either funder or researcher or evaluator and coming in, but recognizing to take it more from that partnership lens, and you are contributing and you are maybe a conduit, whether it's through money or time or different expertise in supporting that. I think there's only so much objectivity. We each bring a different lens and cultural aspect and understanding into the work, and being aware of the accountability you have in the process. So recognizing that as research, it's historically been extremely extractive, and what funding requirements may have, what different reporting requirements. Often it's very rare for an initiative to only have one source of funding. So they are looking at multiple ways of having to provide evidence and data to support it, which typically is output based. And how can we support shifting that to be that process? In our work, we're fortunate to really have developmental evaluation embedded in and be very process based and learn along the way. And I think the approach that's been taken with this work too is reflective of that through the stories and the narratives. Nowhere in these pages did I see a single number about something, which was actually really refreshing. I'm full supporter of quantitative work too, but in some of this, you lose that messiness and complexity and that human element. And I think in being a part of the work and elevating those voices and reflecting the different narratives and experiences, our role as researchers, knowledge mobilizers, comes into play with how we approach that, and really being respectful and mindful of what is being brought forward and how does this elevate and champion the work that's happening on the ground, or help bring forward the resources and supports necessary to achieve when there are gaps in implementation or process operations.
Val, I wonder if you can just say one more, just a couple more sentences. I mean, I'm picking up on Christine's language of creating the conditions. I think there's a lot of passion and interest in creating supportive conditions for different knowledges, et cetera. And you're talking about the embeddedness of developmental evaluation. And I'm wondering if you might speak a little bit to the backdrop to that. What are those conditions that are in place that support that reflective developmental kind of work?
Definitely. I think, as others have mentioned, time. That came out in our earliest DE work in year 1 of this, and we're now in year 4 or 5, constantly making the time to do it. And I think the impact of COVID is that people are even more limited in their time, or they're burnt out, and even getting people together over Zoom and having these conversations, you have to extend it further. It takes a little bit more time than even before, and especially when working with Indigenous-led hubs or nation-based initiatives, that lack of being able to meet in person has extremely impacted the implementation process. So we're already seeing huge disparities between 3 of the hubs that are nation-based and the work that they're able to do, because you're losing that land-based connection cultural practices that make it much more difficult, and having to meet and respond to that and encourage those different sponsors and funders that it's going to look different and you have to provide the time. It's not equitable if you don't. And here are those historical and systems-based changes. So I think creating the environment where initially it was community-led, and it continues to be community-led, but there's now an active provincial oversight committee built up of different ministry members, as well as kind of core provincial stakeholders, in being those leaders who have the ability and the accountability to take what's being discovered, and how do you make that change, and how do you create that space. And I think Louis, as you shared, especially that like mastery in the learning process and humility in leadership, people are taking that step back, and there's signs that this evidence is being listened to. And even though it doesn't have hard numbers associated with it, because in accessing programs, we're hearing from youth that like they don't want to fill out all their demographics. We had a really good session with youth a couple of weeks ago, even just about identifying their gender. And they're like, no, we don't want to have it this way. Like, maybe have pronouns. We'd rather select our pronouns. And in no other way, unless you sit down and talk to people about what they want to do, and being like, you know what, this matters to the youth. I know government is asking for these standard kind of categories, but we're going to push for here's why it's going to shift this way. And we're going to elevate those youth voices, and they're the ones leading this work. And it's us to kind of step back and create that space to listen instead of being like, that's a nice idea, but this is the way it's always been done. We're going to just have to stick because this lines up with Statistics Canada better. It's like, you know what, how do we actually create that shift and start advocating for, you know what, you're telling us this, we're listening, and we're actually responding to your environment and your needs.
Stephanie, I saw your hand up. Over to you.
Something I was thinking about, well, Val, you were talking about the pandemic and the challenges, and we talked about, you know, the work that everybody's been doing on the ground. And I just want to point out that, you know, in general, the entire population is tired. And I'm speaking from myself personally, and my team, and you know, my family, and people who are delivering these types of programs as well. And I just want to sort of make the plea here as well for all of us when we're thinking about knowledge mobilization, that we're also thinking about the wellness of those that are the knowledge holders, and the amount of things that have been put on people to share their knowledge, to do this, to be part of this program, to be part of this. And everybody wants to be part of all of the symposiums and the conversations and bring everybody to the table. And everyone wants to go to the table, I think. But I'm also just conscious of, you know, people are tired, and we do need to spend the time to, you know, protect and cherish our own workforce around health promotion. And Barb, this is part of this symposium as well, which I think is absolutely critical as we emerge from the pandemic. But just recognizing that and naming that reality that we're all facing, and how we can support each other in this hard work. It's hard sledding. And it's hard on, you know, pre-COVID. So you know, I think that's another reason why we need to support each other in standing up all of this really good work, and bringing the time in for these conversations and knowledge exchange.
Oh, so well put, Stephanie.
It's so
So-
powerful. It's Louis. It's very interesting. I mean, I so value what's been said. I think you have to begin with the stance that knowledge is sacred. And you have to demonstrate the sacredness of that knowledge, meaning those who have the responsibility to carry that knowledge within a community, within a family, within a society, at whatever level, have to be valued and believed. And there's no need for us, through evaluation criteria, to put conditions for them to prove the accuracy, the validity of that knowledge. That as well, that we then have the privilege of owning that knowledge. If you come with the point of privilege, you will only get a glimpse of what they know, of what people know, because they're living it. They're living their knowledge, they're living their realities, and that's sacred. And as well, nobody wants what people interpret or retrieve from conversations, interactions, as being deficit laden, as being less than, as being a measure of their strength, a measure of their validity. I worked with homeless for the last chapter of my career. And my stance in working with homeless, and I demanded it from my staff, and I demanded it in our relations with institutions that had 100 years of service and privilege and presence in that community with those individuals. I demanded two things. One is, they were once warriors. Don't see them as the bottom of the pile, as being in the shadows of our society, as most dysfunctional, but treat them as if they were warriors once, meaning they are sacred beings. And secondly, believe them rather than ask questions to prove to you the accuracy of the importance, because you'll only hear what you want to hear. You already know what you want to hear when you ask the question. And so not knowing is a very important stance. And it was powerful, and it was an important way to approach it. and very, very deep respect, because all of knowledge is based on values. We know that.
Mhm.
I've studied it. I've taught in universities. I've helped a dozen people get their doctorate. I know that knowledge production is bias. I know that it's grounded in culture, that it's grounded in history, and it's grounded often in uh, colonial measures and means and ways. So
Mhm.
I'd rather base our knowledge on values, not because we only work with the ones who are like us, but that we value all of it. And one of the things that we realize in the Indigenous community is that it's refreshing when we look at what's happening in broader society as outsiders, because that's the nice thing about being in the margins, that you can take a look at what's happening inside things, because you've been marginalized. So it's a privilege. We look at what's happening currently in our society in Canada, and we've said to each other, hey, they finally realize that they have Wendigo-Con in their society. And a Wendigo-Con is a clan of people who are contraries. And the main society, now has to learn to form new relationships with people who have contrary beliefs and approaches and values,
Mhm.
and not to marginalize them, but actually to learn from them and recognize that they have a place in the circle. And until you make a place in the circle, they will contest, criticize, and be in conflict with you. And their role is to laugh when you cry, is to disturb the status quo, is to make you reflect on what you're not seeing and illuminate things. So we treat them as sacred beings, the contraries. We welcome them in our ceremonies. And we also learn how to manage those relationships so they don't consume, right? So we give them space and respect. And so it starts with values, and it leads itself around a circle that leads to the spirit leads to the mind, whereby the values influence decisions. And let's be reflective and honest about the decisions we make as funders, as systems, as academia, as researchers, as participants, and recognize the values that are guiding this, because we have to do it from the beginning. Eventually, you have a responsibility, if you have the privilege of knowing and being the knowledge keeper and having done the work and the privilege of learning these techniques, strategies, you have a role to play in the circle. And the community will ask you, are you prepared to be a warrior with what you know and what you've learned and what we've shared? Meaning you have to advocate for change. You have to more than just know this, you have to live this. And so people will at one point, from the experience they've been given by belonging, will have to speak to equity, meaning they will have to speak. And part of the research is the narrative around inequity and naming it and recording it for history, and being the voice in that circle that recognizes their own contribution, their history, and their allyship, and the transformative power of this experience has been for them. You have to chronicle that. And it may mean nothing on a shelf today, but in 20 years, someone will want to take a look at, were there people who were awakened 20 years ago and had the courage to speak to power and to be an ally and to talk about equity? And that's the investment you're making. And it's a courageous act that will lead to marginalization, because you will be silenced. There will be efforts to silence you. So you have to surround and belong in a group that will actually support your journey in this regard. Because knowledge mobilization is not a destination, it's a journey.
And
It's not the end point.
Louis, thank you so much. I mean, this, you've just crystallized as well. I mean, you talked about a crystal of truth previously, but crystallizing too, that knowledge mobilization and all it is about transformative change. I would like to invite, we've got literally 5 minutes left. I would like to invite the other three panelists to just, if you'd like to, a few closing remarks before we close this session and move into the next. So, so Louis, you were actually first on my list, so that was great. And we will now, Valerie, if you're open to offering just a few final remarks, that would be wonderful. Thank you.
Sure, thank you. This has been a lot of food for thought, and I think this is the joy of people coming together despite being tired, and making the space, I think, is a huge thing to dedicate time to learn and absorb and share from each other. I think part of my takeaways and things I'd like to share, really educating those that you're working with to see CAM as part of their work, not the post-process activity, and embedding it as there's opportunities to learn throughout the journey rather than waiting for the, oh, but did we achieve this? That's not where learning occurs. That's just looking for what you want to see. I think Louis connected that really well. And as we do this, centering those activities around relationship and collaboration, and being vulnerable around your approaches, and recognizing that, you know what, with our work with integrated youth hubs in Alberta, we've gone back to the drawing board many times. We heard early on in the process is that if your model looks like what you put on paper the first time, you're probably not doing it right. And that has rung true pre-COVID, during COVID, and I imagine in the post-COVID years as well. It is going to constantly evolve and adapt, and being there and getting ahead of things when you can, and creating that space and the rooms and the audiences, and bringing the right people together to learn from those changes instead of just helping them occur in one setting. How do you take that and really expand the reach and help build that knowledge? So that's kind of my parting words for today.
Thank you so much, Valerie. Stephanie.
So thank you. Thank you, Barb, for and the KDNE Hub for organizing the symposium and the panel today. I'm almost speechless, but never quite. So, and I said I was energized, and then I said I was tired. So, and now I'm energized again. So maybe my parting words will be, you know, I'm going to challenge all of ourselves. I'm challenging myself really to be ambitious. And to think bigger and to think outside the box, because I think, Louis, you were saying, you know, like there's lots that have been done and we seem to be continually walking down similar paths. I think it's hard when you're in the path, and it's hard to kind of move off the path, and that's where innovation happens. And in innovation, you're going to have some tripping and some steps back and different things, but that's where the excitement is as well. And so if we can sort of get off of our paths and look around us a little bit more, I'm speaking for myself, I think that's what's giving me some energy here. So in the hub, I think the KDNE Hub can be a convener for this and help us build some receptivity, and ultimately turn that receptivity into wider partnerships for greater impact. So thank you. Merci tout le monde.
Stephanie. Christine.
Yeah, it's hard to know what to say as part of the wrap up here. I guess for me, I always love the saying, you know, think big, start small. And so I guess I would offer a bit of a continued call to action. And I know everyone who's here is so engaged and already really active, but maybe just to take you know, there was a talk about bravery and bravery through our fatigue. And thank you, Stephanie, for calling that out, because I think we're all feeling that in many different ways. But to take one small step, maybe it's sending someone you met through this event an email to say you were inspired by their work. You know, taking one risk, you know, taking one idea that's a bit outside the box, and just doing that one small thing that might actually lead to something bigger. But thank you, Barb, for including me on this panel. Thank you to the other panelists. This was a really great conversation, and congratulations to everyone on the important work that's being done here.
Oh, my goodness. Thank you, Christine. And, you know, when we think about, we've heard a little bit here about some of the great gains, and I think there have been some interesting gains. You know, within knowledge mobilization, a greater emphasis on relationships. That's where a lot of, you know, this conversation started. And like most things, I think the more we know, the more we realize we don't know as well. And to really deeply understand knowledge as sacred and relationships as sacred, and this stance of openness and not knowing, giving space and respect. And my closing remark perhaps is, in addition to deep gratitude for all of you, is I think a crystal of truth from this conversation is about the need for deep change. We've heard that throughout the symposium, and the pandemic, with all its warts and difficulties, has exposed some of what's needed. And to name it, to acknowledge the deep change that's needed, to make inequity illegal, to inspire the deep change. I think that we're being called to do that. And one of the things I'm really grateful for is, in this conversation and many others, what I'm not hearing is a blaming. It is an acknowledging. It is a collective desire to engage in some transformative change, to think big and start small. So thank you to all very, very much. I know this will inspire, at least for me, it'll inspire many more, both conversations and, importantly, actions to come. So thank you so much to you four as panelists. On our agenda now is moving to our closing session. We do have a 10-minute break between 3C and 3D. It's the same Zoom link, so I would ask you to please stay in the room, mute yourselves, turn off the video. We'll be coming back at 10 past the hour. And a treat for you is that I won't be chairing the last session. It will be Shannon Bradley Dexter who's chairing the final session, so she will welcome you back.